6.5. Welcome to Module 4. In this week's module, we're going to be going over a lot of the basic fundamentals with programming in R. We're going to have a few tasks this week. The first two tasks that we're going to have are to be doing some reading. The first reading that we're going to have is in Programming Skills for Data Science, and that's going to be Chapter 5, Introduction to R. What Chapter 5 is going to be covering a lot of is introduction to R code, using RStudio to run R code, a little more information about the console and the environment, some of the plots, packages, help, and etc., as well as running R from command line. This chapter will also go into other things that might be less often discussed, such as making comments, or the different ways of even declaring or defining variables. We'll also be going over different data types, such as characters or logical data types or numerics, and we'll go into how R handles them dynamically. That is, when we declare data types in R compared to other languages, we don't necessarily need to say what that mode is or what that type of variable is. And so we'll be exploring how R dynamically handles these different variable types. This chapter will also go into detail about how to get help, how to read the error messages, some different resources to find and to look up different packages that you might be using or you're struggling to use, such as Stack Overflow, and in general is very good for helping you have the resources of learning how to code in R. In our other reading, R for Everyone, we'll be going over Chapter 4. Chapter 4 in R for Everyone is more of a fundamental background on everything that you would be doing in R from a basic standpoint. So what this means is that we'll be going over basic math and just learning how the order of operations or PEMDAs are used for doing numerical calculations. We'll also look into using variable assignments, removing variables and data types in a little more further detail. As well as the fact this chapter will be our introduction chapter in going over vectors, which is how the fundamental way that R stores a collection of elements. Within R, everything is a vector, and so understanding how vectors work and what they are and how R is able to use vector operations will greatly speed up your ability to use R and to solve more complicated tasks. This chapter will also go over factors. It will go over handling functions and function documentation and how to call functions, as well as pipes. These lessons are going to be fundamental and are going to provide the backbone of more complicated analyses that we're going to do in R and as a programming language in general. So reading this is going to be very important. This week, we're also going to have a discussion. The discussion is going to be similar to every other week in that you're asked to respond to the posts on Wednesday. That way you have given your other classmates enough time to respond to those posts to get full credit. The rubric for that is going to be the same as the week 1, week 2, and week 3 as well. This week, we will have a lab. In Lab 2, it will cover fundamentally everything that we've done so far inside of this class. So we'll be using R Markdown to make a document that's going to show our input and the output for codes. We're going to learn through a lot of the things in chapters 4 and 5 in Programming Skills for Data Science and R for Everyone, as well as the fact that we're going to be using GitHub. Albeit only briefly and not to use for collaborations, but we will be using GitHub to access data sets that are going to be necessary for the lab. So when we go ahead and we click on this lab, we'll see a little bit what we're working with. So the lab is going to be due on Saturday, February 23rd by 11:59 p.m. And I have listed a general rubric for this lab. 10 points will be awarded for a well-written write-up, and 10 points will be awarded for each of the different parts. There are 3 parts in this lab. Part 1 should not be extremely difficult, and this is more of a confidence builder and to allow you to become more familiar with using R and assigning variables and understanding different types of variables like logic variables or numerics. But then as we go into part 2, it's definitely going to be a lot more in depth. We're going to have to go into a little bit of vectors, and you'll be asked to explore how different types of variables are dynamically handled inside of R, and we'll be going through a list of instructions on how to explore that, as well as the fact that we'll be covering how to use different functions or calling functions. And these functions are not discussed in the book. We have not discussed how to use them thus far inside of the class so far, but one of the best resources and the best things that you can do as a programmer is by learning how to use the resources available to you so that you can understand how different functions work that you might not be familiar with. That's one of the benefits of working with R, is that it's open source, so people can continuously build and expand upon projects. But that's also what makes it somewhat frustrating sometimes, because a lot of different functions won't necessarily operate the same way in different packages. And so learning how to adjust to that and figure out how certain functions work is going to be very important for the class. So within this lab, in the part 2, I'm going to be asking that you use the functions cat and paste to project or display a vector that you'll be building inside of that part as well. Inside of part 3, this is where GitHub will be used a little bit, as well as mastering the order of operations. Although it does seem simple, the way that you do input calculations into R will dictate the output or the answer that you get. If you do not correctly use order of operations, you might be getting a value that you did not intend for. And so to start our practice with learning how to use orders of operations, or that's PEMDAS, we're going to be using R to solve the quadratic equation. Within this equation, I have the equation listed, and we will be having A, B, and C, and we'll need to solve for x. When we solve for x, we'll be getting two values, one for minus b plus b squared minus 4ac over 2a, and one for minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. The way that we will be finding these variables, however, is that we will need to access the data set that I have listed in GitHub, in that repository that was done in the exercises from last week. So if you did not finish those exercises, I highly recommend that you finish those exercises so that you can understand how to access the data sets that are necessary for doing part 3 in the lab. This module is a great module for learning some of the basics in R. Some of the things might seem a little intuitive, especially with different classes, but I highly recommend that you go ahead and explore how that works, how vectors work, and explore some of the R documentation for understanding how different functions also work. Becoming familiar with those concepts and learning new things like that will ensure that you will be able to use R inside of the workplace for handling different problem sets that you might not have originally thought of. So as always, you feel free to approach me by email or by Zoom. And as a reminder, we can have Zoom meetings on Wednesdays from 9 in the morning to 11 in the morning. The answer boards and the discussions are always a great place for you to start. It allows you the opportunity to possibly earn extra credit, as well as the fact that it allows other students to help you and expand upon certain information that you might be struggling with. And these discussion boards are a great resource for us all to learn and get better with R. So have a great week and enjoy your learning. Thank you.